Hi, my name is Roman Herkovsky. I'm with the IBM Worldwide Cloud Competitive Team. Today, I would like to introduce you to a new total cost of ownership tool. This TCO tool allows you to do the comparison of running WebSphere application server on-prem or in the cloud. We have created this tool based on experience of running number of WebSphere workloads on-prem as well as some experience of running WebSphere workloads in the cloud. As you probably know, IBM has introduced WebSphere on the cloud as well as Liberty Build Pack in the last several years. And with this tool, what we would like to do is to allow our customers to make informed decisions about where to run their WebSphere application server workloads. So let me show you the tool so that later you can download it and use it yourself. So here's the tool. The spreadsheet is very simple Excel spreadsheet, and there are several tabs. Some of them are input tabs, some of them are result calculated tabs. There are several places where you need to enter the data. So for instance, on the on-prem hardware tab, what you see here are two kinds of environments. One is pre-production and another is production. So let's look at the pre-production environment first. To help you get started, we provided several pre-built configurations. What you see here are small, medium, and large. Let's look at the medium configuration. You can also play around with it, pick small, large, or you could enter your own data after you picked one of the configurations. Let me pick, let's pick large configuration. In the large configuration, what you see, 10 servers, and by the way, you could see the cells that are colored in light blue. Those are entry cells. The white cells are really being calculated. You're not supposed to change those values. So in the pre-production environment, so you could see these are pre-production. We have 10 application servers. Each of those servers has 8 cores, 128 gigabyte of memory, and then the costs are calculated based on assumptions. I'll show you those in a second. We assume we have 4 HTTP servers. I could change that to 3 HTTP servers, and I would say that instead of 4 servers per I have 4 cores, I have 2 cores per server, and maybe 16 gigabyte of RAM. And you could see the costs are being recalculated based on the cost of memory, CPUs, and so forth. And for the load balancers, let's say I have only one load balancer with 2 cores and 32 gigs of RAM. I can also add other servers. So for instance, I can click here and say I have a firewall server, which in pre-production, let's imagine I do not have that, but you could add it. The really important thing here is pre-production server utilization. So what is that is, that's really the rate at which your servers are being utilized in terms of the CPU for the most part. In this case, it says 30%. That's probably too optimistic, because if you look at your pre-production environments, in most cases what you have is consider weekends, hours at night, consider holidays, and your pre-production team, your developers, your QA is probably, even if you only consider 8 hours a day, out of those 8 hours a day, they might be using that environment maybe half the time, and then add all of those holidays, nights, and weekends, you end up with industry average 10 or 7% utilization. We can do 10%. Now let's look at the production environments next. In the production environment, we have similar but just slightly different configuration. We have 12 app servers, 4 HTTP servers, and again, we can change that. We can say 2 load balancers and 2 other servers. By other servers, those could be, for instance, LDAP servers. And I could say I have 1 firewall server, and I can enter my own cost of the firewall server, and that could be customized. Again, you could pick whatever the cost you want. For production environment, we could leave 30% utilization rate. I have seen with my customers in production anywhere from 5% average through the year to roughly 60% average through the year. It depends on the platform. For instance, on mainframes, the utilization rates are much higher, usually well beyond 50%. On Intel platforms, because servers are smaller, and even with KVM or VMware virtualization, the utilization rates are usually way below 50%. So let's keep 30% here. Now, the other things here are also quite important. You don't just run servers, you have to store data somewhere, and that means you have to have storage. And that storage would normally be industry average 20% of your server costs. You can customize it, override these values if you'd like, but we made an assumption of 20%. The requests need to come into those servers. You need network, and network is usually roughly 10% of your server cost. Again, you need routers, switches, you need to pay for the bandwidth in and out of your data centers. So 10% is conservative assumption for the networking. Now, what if you have an important business to run and everybody's business is important to them? You need disaster recovery environment, probably several thousands of miles away from your main data center, so hurricanes and other tornadoes don't affect your servers. Now, what that means is that you need to build a data center, physical location, security. You need to have the servers set up, networking, software, and configuration. And that, in this case, we assumed 100% of production environment. We do not include the cost of pre-production in disaster recovery. Now, if you have two data centers and they're both running the workload and they are serving as disaster recovery environments for each other, but they're not standing idle, that means it's not really disaster recovery. We would enter all of those servers and networking costs in the main production environment number of servers, and we would say that the disaster recovery environment is zero in that case. However, if you do have DR and it is standing idle, not doing any work, then we'll assume 100%. So lastly, there is facilities overhead. So those servers, they can't just stay in the field. They have to be in the building. That building has to be secure. And the security guards need to go to restroom and janitor needs to clean the restroom, and you get the idea. So all of those things, including management, rental fees, and all of these other things, electricity, cooling, air conditioning, all of that stuff costs a lot of money, and we assume it costs 20% of all of your hardware costs. So that's how we come up with the total hardware cost for that configuration. Now let's look at the software. For the software, we calculate the number of servers, cores, and PVUs for WebSphere automatically. You can override it if you'd like. For instance, if you already own certain number of PVUs and you don't need to buy them from scratch, which in this case we assume you're buying those PVUs from scratch for a new environment, then you could remove first year cost, for instance, for WebSphere, and then you just can maintain, keep the maintenance support costs for WebSphere. In case of Red Hat Linux, in this case, the support costs are the same year to year, assuming the number of servers stays the same. There is no license cost for Red Hat, you just pay for subscription. There are other things like VMware. If you are virtualizing your servers, then you'd likely buy VMware licenses and then pay maintenance on them in year 2 and 3. You might also have antivirus software, monitoring software, and I would imagine that for $200 for license, you could have, for instance, $150 support. So that could be your anything LDAP licenses or again HTTP servers, monitoring, perhaps HP OpenView or some other software agents and security scanners and so forth that you need to run on those servers. So this is software. There are assumptions in the software. Let me show you these assumptions which you can change. So for instance, I have Red Hat Linux as a list price, so let's be generous and do 50% off Red Hat Linux. Let's do 50% off the VMware licenses and other things. And then you can also pick which version of WebSphere you want to use on-prem. In this case, because we picked the large configuration, the choice was WAS-ND, but you can also switch between Liberty Core, WAS-Base, or WAS-ND. And you can also define how many PVUs per core you have, what is the cost of that PVU, and estimated discount. We'll just randomly pick 50%. Now, I didn't show you the on-prem hardware assumptions. Let me show you that real quick. So the on-prem hardware assuming that there are 2 sockets per server, the baseline cost of the Power 8, $25,000. We can change that. If we change to medium configuration, for instance, then you will see that it changes to Intel server, roughly $14,000. Every additional core, roughly $100. Every extra gig of memory, about $8. Annual maintenance on hardware, about 20%. So these are assumptions. Again, you can change them and override them if you'd like. We went through the software assumptions. Let's look at the labor. This is a really interesting one. My favorite tab in this spreadsheet, if there is such thing as favorite in spreadsheets. The level of scripting is a very critical thing, and you can pick that. In this case, you could choose between limited, moderate, and advanced scripting. The limited scripting, and let me show you that real quick at the very bottom of the spreadsheet, how we're using these numbers. So there are 3 kinds of maintenance that need to be done. The maintenance, and you don't need to enter this by hand, I'm just showing you to explain how the spreadsheet works, but I guess for the most part these assumptions will work well. So there are 3 kinds of maintenance. One is hardware maintenance, meaning that you have to replace hard drives, memory, plug in and out the network cables, and that's a hardware maintenance. And it's 1 hour per month per server, regardless of the level of scripting, because you can't script hardware maintenance. It's hardware, at least not yet. There are 2 other types of maintenance. One is system level software, and this is per hour, per month, hours for every server, and also application support. So what is system level software? So that's things like installing and patching and configuring and tuning operating system, WebSphere itself, those monitoring agents, firewalls, and configuring the system level stuff. The application support time is when you spend certain time on monitoring your applications, deploying them, configuring, adding users. So it's application specific as opposed to building clusters and installing fix packs and so forth. Now, you could see how this changes from advanced scripting to moderate to limited. Now, limited scripting is when somebody uses a little bit of scripting, but they're also using a lot of the admin console, where they will open the console, or they will type commands by hand, or they will click in the console. Moderate scripting when they do more automation, and then advanced scripting is when they're really almost fully automated, probably using Chef, Puppet, or a lot of WSAdmin scripts or Bash scripts or Urban Code Deploy. Very, very advanced, and we went very, very optimistic on this, half an hour per month per server for advanced scripting. Now, there are also things, the hardware investigation and planning, and that's regardless of the level of scripting, and also software investigation planning. That means managing PMRs, deciding which version of the software to use, and doing that kind of overall planning management work. It doesn't depend on the number of servers, it's a baseline overhead that you do regardless. And you could also see the FTE cost of the personnel, including all of the benefits, salary, overhead, management, and so forth, $154,000. Depending on the country where you are, it could be more or could be less. So going back to our scripting, because we chose, in this case, moderate scripting, we calculated how many servers need to be set up, average hours per server of labor, and then you could also see the hardware and software investigation, and then also the level of scripting that we picked from those choices. And then we calculate how much time needs to be spent on managing that environment. So that's a labor tab. Now let's look at the cloud option. The cloud is where most of this is actually calculated, except for one thing where you can make a choice. You can decide what kind of cloud environment would you like to move into. So if you want to move with minimum change, you want to just lift and shift, pick up your on-prem application that runs on WASD and run that with almost no changes in the cloud, then what you would choose here is WASD on cloud. You can also decide, well, maybe you want to go to WASBase in the cloud or Liberty Build Pack. So those are available choices, and then you could see average hours being calculated based on the workloads that we specified, and then some list prices for the product that you choose. Again, you don't need to enter that. Really what you need to enter is just your choice of deployment. Now, in the choice of deployment, if we go up a little bit here, you could also see there is cost of migration. Now, the cost of migration is not included. How do you know how much to spend on migrating from the on-prem application into the cloud? Because it's not zero, it's more than zero. The cost of migration depends on the kind of deployment target you have in the cloud. So if you decide to just lift and shift, move your WAS-ND application from on-prem into the cloud, the cost of migration will be minimum. Almost, well, not zero, but it will be negligible. Now, what you could do is move into the Liberty build pack in the cloud, and that will require changing of your administration procedures, changing the way you do security, changing the way you bind into data sources, because Liberty build pack is a true platform as a service environment. Now, how do you know how much to spend, how much money to estimate and time to spend on migration? Well, the good news is that we have the migration assessment tool. So if you go into the ibmadvantage.com, this is my blog, and on ibmadvantage.com in the menu, you click on migration right here. You could see on the right hand side several articles that talk about migration. And one of these articles covers this migration tool. So you click on that article and it explains how to use the migration tool. It's an online, web-based, browser-based tool. So you can watch the YouTube video, or you can go ahead and click on the link for the web-based tool. And you could see the questions that you need to enter. So once you go through these questions, you'll get an estimate of the migration cost, and then you plug that in right here. So you could say, for instance, well, let's imagine migration will cost me $100,000. And that will be year 1, and year 2 and 3, I don't need to spend anything on migration. Now, that's basically all we needed to know about the cloud option. Now, in comparison summary, you could see the tool calculates the costs of running WebSphere in the cloud versus running that on-prem. And you could see the different categories. So for instance, here you see application support labor. In this case, running that on-prem, $746,000, running that in the cloud, $559,000. Why would you spend less labor running WAS-ND in the cloud? Well, because for one thing, the application configuration can be very repeatable in the cloud. It's very easy to deploy new instances. It's very much unlike on-prem. Now, if you go and change the labor to be advanced labor, the difference, level of scripting to be advanced, the difference between the management becomes very, very little. So you could see that the management with very advanced scripting on-prem is $74,000, and then the management in the cloud will be $55,000, much smaller difference. Now you could see hardware support labor on-prem is $154,000, and it's completely gone in the cloud because you don't have to support any hardware in the cloud. You don't have to install any operating systems or fix patches in the cloud because all of that done by IBM for you. You see the initial hardware setup will be completely gone. This is actually software support, and this is software license. So software license in the cloud is replaced by the cloud subscription cost. So you could see cloud subscription cost for running WebSphere, which by the way includes all of the networking, all of the facilities cost, all of the software, all of the hardware, storage, all of those things, including a lot of labor that IBM automated for you. All of those things are included as cloud subscription cost, where on-prem, you have separate license costs, you have separate software support costs, you have separate hardware costs, as well as hardware maintenance costs, and then you have the facilities cost, which is also quite significant. And you have hardware maintenance, which I mentioned. So you could see that in this case, running in the cloud will be 77% more effective. Now, if you go back to on-prem labor and you say, well, I don't have advanced scripting, unfortunately. I have moderate scripting. Then let's look at comparison summary. 68% difference. Let's do limited scripting. If you have very limited scripting, 63% difference. Because when you move to WebSphere in the cloud and you don't use the Liberty build pack, with limited scripting, you still have to do that by hand in IBM Cloud using those VM images and managing your applications yourself. Now, IBM still does about 25% of that work for you, which is still a great news. But where you could really benefit is improve your level of scripting, as well as potentially move to the Liberty build pack. So in the cloud option, let's move into the Liberty build pack. Instead of using WASD in the cloud, let's refactor the application a little bit, and let's move into the Liberty build pack. And now look at the comparison summary. 93% savings. Huge, because Liberty Build Pack is a true platform as a service environment. Lots and lots of things that you would otherwise have to do yourself are completely automated by IBM. So you don't have to do that by hand. That's very powerful. Now, it will require some work. You can't just move WASD app into the Liberty Build Pack. So what we really need to do is go here and say, well, it's not going to cost us $100,000 to move into Liberty Build Pack. It's probably going to cost us $400,000. I'm just taking totally random guess. You really should be using the migration estimation tool. But nevertheless, let's just make an assumption, $400,000 as a migration cost, and let's look at the comparison summary. That's still huge savings. So you may want to consider refactoring the app, not really so much the source code, but more your admin procedures, a little bit of a source code as well, and move that app into the Liberty build pack, because that's where you get the biggest bang for the buck. All the automation of platform as a service. You don't need to worry about a lot of things that you otherwise have to do yourself. So that is very powerful. We can play a little bit more with the tool, but you get the idea. We can go back to the on-prem hardware, and you can change different settings. You can go, instead of a large, you can pick small configuration. In the small configuration, you could see I only have app server and 2 app servers in pre-production, and then because I overrode some of the values by hand, I will just erase them here because I broke formulas when I was editing that. But you could see that in a small configuration, having app server, only 2 of them, and then I would be using, in a small configuration, for the software, I'd use Liberty Core right here, and I could say Liberty Core or WAS Base or WAS ND. So for small configuration, the default is Liberty Core. Let's just change it to WAS Base just for the heck of it. WAS Base. And then on-prem labor, let's imagine that we have perhaps moderate scripting for the on-prem labor. For the cloud option, we could have, instead of using Liberty build pack, let's imagine we just move to the WAS base on the cloud. And now let's look at the comparison summary. Well, in this case, the return on investment is negative. In this configuration, you do not want to move into the cloud, so you don't always get the positive result, which totally makes sense. So hopefully that helps, and good luck with making your cloud decisions. Thank you.